I still remember her voice on the phone, chirpy and excited, like a teenager planning her first trip. "Mom, it's just for the weekend. You'll love it. The house is quiet, Max is a sweetheart, and I've stocked the fridge with everything you might need." I smiled, clutching the phone tighter. Rachel always knew how to make things sound rosy. "Are you sure, honey? I don't want to be in the way," I said. She laughed. "Don't be silly. You'll be helping me out, and Max just loves you. Plus, you deserve a break too. Think of it as a little retreat. Netflix, snacks, and cuddles for my fur baby." It had been a while since I felt useful, not just needed in the "can you babysit" way, but truly trusted. I missed that feeling. After all, when your only child gets married and builds a life of her own, it's easy to start wondering where you still fit in. So I said yes. I packed light, a few sweaters, my favorite tea bags, and some mystery novels I'd been meaning to finish. Rachel's place was only 30 minutes away from mine, but it felt like stepping into a different world, a more modern one with smart lights, scented candles, and a spotless, white kitchen. She greeted me with a quick hug, her suitcase already by the door. Her husband, Mark, gave me a polite smile from behind his phone. "Emergency numbers on the fridge, and there's dog food in the pantry," she said while digging through her purse. "Oh, and we had some groceries delivered yesterday. You should be good." I nodded, even though I didn't see much in the fridge when I peeked earlier. Maybe I missed something. They kissed Max goodbye and headed out the door, chattering about spa reservations and hiking trails. And just like that, it was quiet. I kicked off my shoes and settled onto their plush couch. Max immediately curled up beside me, his tail thumping lazily against the cushions. I let out a long breath and smiled. For once, it felt like the world had slowed down enough for me to catch up. Later that evening, I padded into the kitchen, thinking about making some tea and maybe a small dinner. But when I opened the fridge, my smile faded. No milk, no eggs, no leftovers, just a half-empty bottle of sparkling water, a sadly looking apple, and some condiments. I opened the freezer. Only ice cubes and an old bag of frozen edamame. I chuckled nervously. Maybe the pantry had something, but that was just a few spices, a box of dog treats, and 2 cans of lentil soup. I turned back to the fridge and stared, trying to remember what she said. "We had groceries delivered yesterday?" Really? I checked the delivery app she'd mentioned once, but I didn't know her password, and my phone signal was spotty in this part of the house. I figured I'd just make do tonight and ask her tomorrow morning. I ended up having a cup of plain tea and half the apple. Max ate his kibble happily, none the wiser. I curled up on the couch, watched a rerun of an old mystery show, and tried not to let the gnawing in my stomach turn into something bigger, something more emotional. She said it was just for the weekend, just 2 days. I tried to sleep early, but the couch felt unfamiliar and the silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. I stared at the ceiling fan above me and thought about how often I used to cook for Rachel, how I used to surprise her with her favorite pie or run errands for her when she was swamped. Now here I was, alone in her house, eating scraps like an uninvited guest. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was rushed, maybe the groceries were delayed, maybe she really believed everything was set up properly. I wanted to believe that, but deep down, something didn't sit right. By the time I woke up the next morning, I was already feeling it. The dull ache in my back from sleeping on the couch, and the sharper one in my stomach from barely eating the night before. I shuffled into the kitchen, hoping maybe I'd overlook something. I opened the fridge again, this time really looking. Still nothing, no milk, no juice, no bread, no butter, no eggs, no fruit. The apple one nibbled on last night was the only thing remotely edible. Even the coffee canister on the counter was empty. I checked the cabinets again. No cereal, no pasta, just dog treats and a forgotten bag of rice sealed with a twist tie. I moved to the pantry. Empty shelves and more spices, not even sugar. I opened the lower cabinet under the sink and stared blankly at a row of cleaning products. Then I just stood there, my hands still on the handle, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Maybe she meant to shop. Maybe she was rushing and thought she'd have time. Maybe the grocery delivery got delayed or went to the wrong address. I picked up my phone and called her, straight to voicemail. I called again, no answer. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, waiting for her to text back. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Max rested his head on my feet, his soft eyes looking up at me. I bent down and scratched behind his ears. Looks like we're both out of luck, huh? I whispered. He whimpered softly. I searched the freezer again and found a bag of bread crusts, the kind you'd usually throw away. I popped a few pieces in the toaster, buttered them with the last scrape from a near-empty tub, and told myself it was enough. It wasn't. As I chewed, my mind drifted. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the feeling. That ache in my chest wasn't hunger, it was hurt. I remembered the time Rachel got sick in 3rd grade, and I stayed up 3 nights in a row holding her hair back and wiping her tears with cold rags. I remember driving across town in a snowstorm just to bring her her favorite soup in college because she had the flu. I remembered staying up late helping her apply to scholarships, babysitting her son so she could work, giving her the down payment for this very house. I never forgot the things she needed, not once. So how could she forget me like this? I stood at the sink, washing the plate I'd used for toast, trying not to cry. Maybe she really didn't mean it. Maybe she assumed I'd bring my own groceries. I figured it out. She probably thought it wasn't a big deal. Maybe I was just being sensitive, too emotional. That's what people always say about older women, right? I dried the plate with a towel and looked around the kitchen again. Everything was so modern, so new, but there was nothing human about it. No warmth, no welcome. I sat back down and stared at the empty coffee mug in front of me. Rachel had said it would be like a retreat, a peaceful weekend, time for myself. But I wasn't feeling rested. I was feeling invisible. Still, I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want to turn this into something bigger than it was. I told myself she'd call soon, that she'd realize she forgot something and send over an order or have groceries delivered. I even left my phone's volume up just in case, but all day it stayed silent. As the sun dipped below the trees and the house grew dim, I realized it wasn't just my stomach that felt empty, it was my heart too. By Saturday morning, the hunger wasn't just an ache, it was a full-body fog. My head throbbed, my knees felt like they were made of stone. Every step I took was slow, heavy. I hadn't eaten anything real since Thursday afternoon, unless you count a couple of crusts and half an apple. I shuffled into the kitchen, praying maybe I had missed something. Anything, but the cupboards were still bare, the fridge still buzzed empty, and the pantry shelves stared back at me like a cruel joke. Even Max was running low on food. I'd given him the last scoop of kibble last night, hoping it would hold him over. I picked up my phone and dialed Rachel again, voicemail. I tried Mark, her husband. It rang twice, then stopped. No voicemail, no message. I sent a text. Hey sweetie, hope everything's okay. There's not much food here, and I can't go out. Please let me know if you can help. I waited nothing. I stared at the little screen until the brightness stung my eyes, then I put the phone down on the table and just sat there, staring out the window. It was a beautiful day. Warm sunlight poured through the glass, lighting up the kitchen in soft gold, but I felt none of it. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped the soul out of me and left the shell behind. Max nudged my leg. He was hungry too. I walked slowly to the pantry and picked up the dog treat box. Only 3 biscuits left. I stared at them, then I broke one in half and gave it to him. The other half I set down on a napkin beside me. I told myself I wouldn't eat it, that I hadn't sunk that low, but 20 minutes later, I took a tiny bite, dry, bland, embarrassing. But it was food, and in that moment, I felt something deeper than hunger, humiliation. How had I ended up like this? I'm 67 years old. I raised a daughter on my own. I worked hard all my life. I gave everything to make sure Rachel had what she needed, and now here I was, sitting at her marble kitchen counter, sharing dry dog treats with her golden retriever, too weak to stand for long, too sore to walk far, and apparently too unimportant to check on. This is what I'd become. Just someone convenient, a placeholder to care for the dog in the house while they went off and lived their beautiful, busy lives. I thought about calling an Uber or a taxi, but I had left my purse back at home. Rachel said I wouldn't need it, and she had driven me here herself. I was stranded. I leaned my elbows on the counter and covered my face with my hands. A part of me wanted to cry, another part wanted to scream, but neither came. Instead, there was just silence, the kind that sits on your shoulders and tells you don't matter. I used to matter. I used to be someone people called when they needed comfort, advice, warmth. Now, I couldn't even get a call back. I reached for my phone again and reread the text I'd sent. Still no reply. I typed out another one, then erased it. What was I going to say? Please remember I exist? No, I wouldn't beg, but I couldn't deny what was becoming clearer by the hour. I wasn't a guest here. I wasn't even a loved one. I was just the help, and once that truth settled in my bones, it hurt more than the hunger ever could. I sat there at the kitchen table, the silence wrapping around me like a cold blanket. Max lay curled up at my feet, his belly as empty as mine. The sun outside was bright, but inside me, everything felt dim and distant. I leaned back in the chair, stared at the ceiling, and let my mind drift, not into the present, but into the past. Rachel was 10 when her father died, a heart attack, sudden and brutal. One moment he was here, laughing at the dinner table, teasing her about her missing front tooth, and the next he was gone. I still remember holding her that night, rocking her back and forth as she sobbed into my chest. I had no idea how I was going to make things work on my own, but I looked into her tear-streaked face, and I knew I had to, so I did. I picked up a second job cleaning offices in the early mornings before heading to my day shift at the library. I packed Rachel's lunch before the sun came up, and I made it home just in time to help her with her homework at night. I was always tired, but I never showed it. She loved ballet back then, pink slippers, sequin leotards, that little bun I used to twist in her hair every Saturday morning before class. Tuition wasn't cheap, but she was good, really good. I remember the way she danced across the living room, thinking she was on Broadway. Her joy was worth every extra hour I worked. When the bills piled up and tuition deadlines loomed, I sold the last gold bracelet my mother had given me, the one I swore I'd pass on to Rachel someday. I told myself it was just a thing. Memories were more important. Her dreams were more important. And when she got into college, oh, how we cried. She was the first in the family to go. I remember us sitting on the porch, staring at the acceptance letter like it was a golden ticket. But then came the fees, the textbooks, the dorm payments, so I cashed out part of my retirement. Quietly, she never knew. Even later, when she got her first job and met Mark, I helped them furnish their tiny apartment. When they wanted to buy a house, I co-signed the loan and handed over most of my savings for the down payment. She called me a blessing back then. She promised I'd always have a room in their home. Now I was in that house, hungry and forgotten. I looked around the sleek kitchen, the shiny backsplash, the fancy fridge that beeped when left open too long. I saw my sacrifices in every polished tile. My hard work was in every corner of this place. And yet, I felt like an outsider. How did I go from being the woman who gave her everything to someone she could abandon with an empty fridge and a dying phone battery? Was it me? Had I made it too easy? Maybe I should have said no more often. Maybe I shouldn't have been so quick to give, to rescue, to sacrifice. But how could I not? She was my baby, the only piece of my husband I had left. I never let her go without, not once. I skipped meals, wore the same winter coat for 6 years, bought all her prom dresses secondhand and altered them myself. Even turned down a date with a man I liked because Rachel wasn't ready to share me with anyone. I gave her everything, and now I was sharing a bag of dog biscuits with her golden retriever, waiting for a phone call that wasn't coming. It wasn't the hunger that hurt the most. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, I had shifted in her mind from mom to caretaker, from home to house sitter. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wouldn't cry, not again. Not for someone who couldn't be bothered to check on me. I had sacrificed my entire life for Rachel's comfort, and now I was finally starting to see the cost. By Sunday evening, the world had started to blur. I sat on the couch with my legs tucked under me, trying to conserve energy. Every movement felt like lifting bricks. My arms ached, my head throbbed, and my stomach had long since stopped growling. It was past that now, it was just hollow. Max lay next to me, his big brown eyes tracking every time I moved. He let out a soft, almost pleading whine. I reached down and rubbed his head. I know, sweetheart, I'm hungry too. I'd given him the last of the dog biscuits that morning, crushed them up, and mixed in a little water to soften them. He ate slowly, not because he wasn't hungry, but because he knew something was wrong. I forced myself to stand and shuffled back into the kitchen, holding onto the counter for balance. My legs trembled under my own weight. I opened the last cabinet I hadn't fully checked, way above eye level. I stood on my toes and stretched, praying for anything. My fingers touched something metal. I pulled it out and stared down at a dusty can of beans. No label, but the top was still sealed. Tears filled my eyes, actual food. I grabbed a fork and opened the can with shaky hands, then split the beans into two bowls. Half for me, half for Max. He licked his up eagerly. I ate slower. Each bite felt both shameful and sacred. I chewed quietly, swallowing more emotion than food. It wasn't a feast, but it was enough to dull the dizziness. I sat back down on the couch, holding the empty bowl in my lap like it meant something. I looked around at the clean, modern space, the sparkling countertops, the untouched wine glasses hanging from the rack, and the family photos on the wall where I was noticeably absent. I wiped my mouth and sat there, frozen. I wasn't just hungry. I wasn't just tired. I was done. Something shifted inside me, subtle but seismic, like the first crack in a dam. It wasn't about the food anymore, or even the silence. It was about respect, or the lack of it. Rachel hadn't just forgotten to stock the fridge. She'd forgotten who I was, who I'd always been. I was her mother, the woman who raised her from a little girl into the polished woman she was now. And yet, here I was, tossed into her house like an afterthought, left with nothing but a bag of dog biscuits and a can of beans, hoping someone remembered I existed. I looked at the phone again, still nothing. No missed calls, no texts, no apologies. They'd be back tomorrow, I assumed, probably with tan skin and wide smiles, talking about spa treatments and fancy dinners. They'd walk in and expect to find everything exactly as they left it. The dog fed, the house clean, the fridge empty, because apparently that was my problem. And I realized in that moment, I'd let this happen. I'd spent decades giving everything I had, my time, my money, my energy, all in the name of love. But love isn't one-sided. Love without respect is just servitude, and I wasn't going to keep serving people who treated me like I was disposable. I set the bowl down gently on the coffee table and sat upright, straighter than I had all weekend. My stomach still ached, my head still swam, but for the first time in days, my heart felt firm. No more begging for attention, no more waiting by the phone, no more explaining why I deserved to be treated like a human being. They might have seen me as just mom or grandma or house sitter, but they'd forgotten that I was also the woman who still held the keys to everything they thought belonged to them, including the family trust. I ran my fingers through Max's fur and whispered, "They don't know who they're dealing with." He wagged his tail once. Tomorrow they'd come home, and I wouldn't be the same woman they left behind. The front door swung open just past 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday. Max perked up immediately, tail thumping wildly against the hardwood floor. I stood slowly, joints stiff, body still weak, but I managed to get to the hallway before she even called out, "We're back." Rachel's voice rang through the house, light and carefree. I watched as she stepped inside, sunglasses on her head, cheeks glowing with a vacation tan. Behind her came Mark, dragging 2 suitcases, one of which had a shopping bag looped over the handle, a logo from some upscale spa retreat I recognized from commercials. "Oh, Mom," Rachel chirped, setting her purse down on the entryway bench. "You would have loved it. The massage I got was unbelievable. My back has never felt this good." She leaned down to greet Max, ruffling his fur while barely glancing in my direction. Mark offered a quick nod. "Everything good here?" I opened my mouth, heart pounding from 3 days of silence and hunger, to tell her no, everything had not been good. That I had been stranded without food or support, that I'd eaten canned beans and dog treats, that I had texted and called and cried, and no one had bothered to check in. But before I could get a word out, Rachel stood up, stretched her arms, and yawned. "Oh, I am exhausted," she groaned. "Travel days are the worst. You don't mind cleaning up the kitchen a bit, right, Mark?" I just want to shower and nap. We'll catch up later. I blinked. Rachel, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice calm. There was no food here. I haven't eaten properly since Friday. I called, I texted. She paused in front of the staircase, turned back slightly, and frowned.
What?
Really? I thought I told you we had groceries delivered.
There was nothing, I said.
Not even dog food. She shrugged. You should have ordered something. We have Uber Eats.
Didn't you think of that?
I felt my chest tighten. Rachel, I didn't have my purse. You drove me here, remember? I had no way to pay for anything. She rolled her eyes, more annoyed than apologetic. Well, that's not my fault. I thought you'd be fine. You always figure things out, Mom. Mark had already disappeared up the stairs. Rachel turned to follow him, but paused one last time. Seriously, the kitchen's a mess. Can you just tidy up before you go? There are dishes in the sink. She didn't even wait for my answer. I stood there, stunned, as her footsteps faded upstairs. My arms hung at my sides. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't heavy, it was sharp. It cut through all the excuses I'd been trying to make for her. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't a mistake. This was who she had become. Rachel didn't see me as her mother anymore. She didn't see me as the woman who had raised her, sacrificed for her, protected her. She saw me as help, someone to house sit, feed the dog, scrub the dishes, and vanish when she returned. The lump in my throat burned, but I didn't cry this time. No, this time I felt something stronger than sadness. Clarity. I looked around the kitchen at the dishes she'd mentioned, at the crumbs on the counter and the empty cabinets. Then I turned, walked back to the couch, and sat down with Max curled up beside me again. I didn't clean a single thing because suddenly I knew exactly what needed to be done, and it had nothing to do with dishes. As I sat there on the couch, Max curled beside me like a little guardian angel. I couldn't stop thinking about how far things had fallen. Rachel's words still echoed in my head. Can you just tidy up the kitchen? Like I was staff, not her mother, not the woman who gave her everything. And yet, as low as she had made me feel, I also realized something. I still held the one card she didn't know about, the trust she had forgotten about. The trust. She never really understood it in the first place. Years ago, when my husband passed, his side of the family, wealthier than most people knew, set up a trust fund in his name. It wasn't flashy money, no mansions, no yachts, just quiet generational wealth that was meant to be protected. It was designed to benefit the future bloodline, our daughter and eventually her children. But there was a catch. The trust would be overseen by one person, the surviving spouse, me. It was written so plainly in the documents. I had final say over distributions, over what got released, when and to whom. I could freeze access, redirect funds, cut off any beneficiary who acted irresponsibly. For years, I never used that power. Rachel assumed the trust was locked up, managed by accountants or attorneys. I let her believe that. I thought if I didn't dangle money in front of her, maybe she'd stay grounded. I didn't want her to grow up entitled. I wanted her to learn to stand on her own 2 feet, even if I was always quietly behind her. But I see now my silence wasn't keeping her humble, it was enabling her selfishness. I had paid off her student loans, helped with her house, covered medical bills when Mark was between jobs. I even gifted them money for their honeymoon, though they told people it came from smart investments. And through it all, I asked for nothing in return, not even gratitude, because I was afraid. Afraid that if I said no, she'd stop coming around. Afraid she'd pull away, that I'd lose the last thread of family I had left. But what I saw this weekend, what I lived through, showed me the truth. I already had lost her, not because I withheld money, but because I never demanded respect. And now it was time to use the one tool I had left, not to punish, but to protect what little dignity I still had, and maybe, just maybe, teach her a lesson that decades of giving hadn't managed to do. Tuesday morning, I didn't wait for anyone's permission. Rachel and Mark were still asleep upstairs, no doubt wrapped in their luxury sheets, dreaming of hot stone massages and champagne brunches. I left a note on the counter for appearance's sake, taking a cab into town, back later. That was all they'd get. I slipped on my shoes, patted Max goodbye, and closed the door behind me without a sound. The cab ride into town was quiet. The driver didn't talk, and I didn't want him to. I watched the scenery roll by through the window. Same streets I'd driven Rachel to ballet class on years ago. Same grocery store where I once stood counting quarters to buy her favorite cereal. So many memories that once made me proud. Now they just felt heavy. By the time we pulled up to my family attorney's office, my nerves had turned to steel. Mr. Franklin had been with our family for over 30 years. He handled my husband's estate, drew up the original trust documents, and had always treated me with respect, something I didn't take for granted anymore. He looked up as I stepped into his office. "Mrs. Walker," he said, standing. "It's been a while." I gave him a nod. I'm a small smile. Too long, but I'm here now because it's time. We sat. I explained everything carefully and calmly. I told him about the weekend, the neglect, the silence, the shame. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The words spoke for themselves. "I want Rachel's access to the trust frozen indefinitely," I said. "No more quarterly disbursements. No access to the principal. Not a cent." Mr. Franklin leaned back in his chair, brows raised. "That's a big move." "Are you sure?" "I'm certain," I replied. "And I want it done quietly, no drama, no confrontation." He nodded slowly. "Legally, you're within full rights. You've always had sole control over release conditions. Do you want to reassign her share completely?" "No," I said. "Not yet, but I want to make one thing clear. She no longer receives automatic distributions. If she wants access again, she can request it in writing with a reason." He typed a few notes on his computer. "I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. Do you want to deliver the update yourself?" I shook my head. "No. I want a letter sent to her 3 days from now, after I've gone home. I don't want a scene. I don't want tears or arguments. I want her to sit with it." He paused, then nodded again. "Understood." I sat there for a moment longer, hands folded in my lap. The office smelled like lemonwood polish and faint cologne, so familiar, and yet today it felt like a different world. A world where I finally remembered who I was before I left. Mr. Franklin looked at me and said quietly, "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Too many parents feel like they have to buy love to keep it. You're not the first I've seen reach a breaking point." I gave him a tired smile. "I don't want to buy love anymore. I want to be seen." As I stepped back outside and into the crisp afternoon air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd taken something from Rachel, but because I had taken something back. My voice, my worth, and the power to say enough. When the cab pulled up in front of my little house, I let out a long breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. It wasn't grand like Rachel's, no marble countertops, no smart appliances, no scented candles placed just so, but it was mine. Quiet, modest, honest. I stepped inside and was greeted by the familiar scent of lavender and lemon from the oil diffuser I kept by the entry table. The floor creaked in the same spot it always had, and the air felt a few degrees cooler than I liked it, but it was home. And for the first time in a long while, I felt safe in it. I dropped my small bag by the door and headed straight to the kitchen. My fridge wasn't packed, but it held the basics: eggs, milk, cheese, some leftover soup I'd made earlier that week. I reached for a carton of eggs and put the kettle on the stove as I scrambled them with toast and reheated the soup. The smell alone nearly brought tears to my eyes, not because it was anything special, but because I could, because I had, because I didn't have to wait for someone to care enough to feed me. I sat down at my kitchen table and took a long, slow bite. I chewed carefully, as if savoring more than just flavor, as if reclaiming something sacred. I cried. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears slipping down my cheeks, catching on the corners of my mouth as I smiled through them. I wasn't just crying for the weekend I'd spent hungry. I was grieving years of being invisible, of giving until there was nothing left, of letting Rachel's comfort come before my dignity, of mistaking silence for strength. I finished eating, washed my plate, and dried it gently. Then I wandered to the little corner nook by the window, my favorite spot in the house. The sun was beginning to set, casting soft pink light over the neighborhood. Kids rode their bikes down the street. Somewhere, someone was barbecuing. Life kept going, and so would I. I pulled open the drawer in my side table, and there it was, a leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in years. The cover was worn, the edges curled. I used to write every day long ago, before life got loud, before being a mother swallowed up every inch of who I was. I dusted it off, grabbed a pen, and opened to a blank page. At first, I didn't know where to begin, but then the words came. Today I remembered who I am. I wrote for hours, not to record events, but to process, to feel, to heal. I wrote about the coldness in Rachel's voice, the hunger that twisted more than just my stomach, the lawyer's office, the silence of my own home that somehow felt louder than hers ever could. As I wrote, something inside me started to shift again. Not out of pain this time, but out of peace. I had been through a storm, but I wasn't broken. I was still standing, still whole, still me. By the time night fell, I lit a candle, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and wrapped a soft shawl around my shoulders. I sat by the window, journal resting on my lap, and looked out at the moonlight brushing the tops of the trees. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet not as a punishment, but as a gift, a space to rediscover myself. It was exactly 3 days later, just after breakfast, when my phone rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my robe, flipping through a magazine and sipping my second cup of coffee. Max, now happily back by my side, was snoozing on the rug near my feet. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, warming my hands and cheeks. I glanced at the caller ID. Rachel. I let it ring once, twice, a third time, then I picked it up. Her voice exploded through the speaker before I could even say hello. Mom, what the hell is this? I took a breath, calm and deliberate. Good morning, Rachel. Don't good morning me. I just got a letter from Mr. Franklin saying the trust has been frozen. Frozen, Mom? Are you out of your mind? I could practically hear her pacing, the panic vibrating in every word. She wasn't calling out of concern. She was calling because her lifeline had been cut off. I'm sure it was a surprise, I said softly. But if you read the letter, you'll see there's a section at the end that explains everything. I didn't even finish it, she snapped. I saw the word suspended and I lost it. What are you even doing, Mom? You can't just take money away from your own daughter. I paused, letting her words settle into the silence. I said, and I did. Her breath hitched on the other end of the line. You're punishing me because I forgot to stock the fridge? Is that it? You're doing this over some groceries? No, I said firmly. This isn't about groceries. It's about years. It's about being seen. It's about realizing that I've spent most of my life giving, and giving only to be treated like a convenience. She didn't respond right away. I could hear something in the background, maybe Mark asking what was going on, maybe her trying to find the letter again. Rachel, I said gently. I didn't want to have this conversation over the phone. That's why I asked Mr. Franklin to send a letter, a very thoughtful one. I suggest you read it, really read it, before you decide how angry you are. I'm not angry, she said, her voice now tight brittle.
I'm shocked.
I thought you loved me. I do, I whispered, but love doesn't mean letting yourself be used. You're my mother. Yes, I said, I am. And it's because I'm your mother that I know this is necessary. Another silence, longer this time. Then, this isn't like you, she said, softer now. You're always nice, you always help. I used to think being nice meant staying quiet, I replied. But that weekend, Rachel, I was starving. I was weak, alone. I ate dog food just to get through. I called you. I texted you. You didn't even notice I was missing.
I didn't know, she said.
I know, and that's the problem. More silence. I imagined her standing there with the letter in her hands, reading the words I'd asked Mr. Franklin to include, my detailed explanation of the weekend, the neglect, the emotional toll, the realization that I had spent decades enabling entitlement in the name of motherly love, and the final line, which I'd written myself, this is not a punishment. It's a pause, a moment for reflection. Access can resume in the future, but only when respect does too. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. So that's it for now, I said. The rest is up to you. I heard her breathing. shallow and uneven, like a balloon deflating. For the first time in a long while, Rachel didn't know what to say, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't try to fill the silence. She hung up without saying goodbye, and I set the phone down gently, sipping my coffee again before it got cold. The fire had been lit, and I wasn't afraid to let it burn away everything that no longer served me. It didn't take long. By Wednesday evening, the phone started ringing again, this time from numbers I hadn't seen pop up in months. First, it was my niece Claire, then my cousin Janice, even my older sister Lorraine, who rarely called unless it was for a birthday or a funeral. They all wanted to know the same thing. What's going on with you and Rachel? I could tell from the tone of their voices indicated that Rachel had already made her rounds, painting the story in broad dramatic strokes according to her. I'd lost my mind, frozen her trust fund out of spite, and left her in financial limbo without warning. One even repeated a version where I had sabotaged her future. I listened, I let them speak, and then in the calmest voice I could manage, I told them the truth. I spent a weekend in her house without food. She left me stranded without checking in once. I shared dog food with Max to get by. She didn't answer a single call. When she came home, she told me to clean her kitchen. There was always a pause after that. Sometimes it was stunned silence, sometimes a sharp inhale, and then came the split. Some, like Claire, were horrified. "Oh my God, Aunt June, I had no idea. That's disgusting. I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked. Rachel didn't tell us that part.
Of course she didn't.
Others, like Lorraine, were more cautious. "Well, still, she's your daughter. Couldn't you have just talked it out?" "I tried," I said. She wasn't listening. A few, just a few, didn't hide their judgment. Janice sighed on the other end of the line. "Freezing her out financially just seems so extreme." "So, does letting your mother go hungry?" I replied. That usually ended the conversation. I could see the lines being drawn. Some people believed in me. Others thought I'd gone too far, that I was being dramatic, that I was punishing Rachel to make a point. Maybe I was, but that didn't mean I was wrong. I didn't argue. I didn't plead for understanding. I didn't feel the need to defend myself the way I used to. Let them believe what they wanted. I was done living to please everyone. For too long, I'd shaped my life around other people's comfort. I'd held my tongue at family gatherings, let myself be the quiet one, the helpful one, the one who never caused trouble. But silence had a cost, and I'd already paid it in full. Now I was choosing something else. Not revenge, not bitterness, but peace. Real peace, the kind that doesn't come from being liked but from knowing you've honored your own worth. I brewed a pot of tea and turned my phone to silent. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and Max slept curled in his favorite spot by the couch. I lit a candle, I put on a record, and I let the quiet wrap around me, not as loneliness, but as healing. I didn't know what Rachel would do next, whether she'd come around or dig in her heels, whether the rest of the family would come to see the truth or keep believing the version that made them more comfortable. But none of that mattered anymore. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. I was finally standing in the light of my own truth, and I had no plans to step back into the shadows. It was a gray, breezy afternoon when I heard the knock on my door. Not a bang, not a frantic pounding, just a gentle, uncertain knock 3 times, like someone wasn't sure if they should be there. Max barked once and trotted to the door. I followed, my heart already knowing who it was when I opened it. There she stood, Rachel. Her hair was pulled back into a loose bun, no makeup, no polished clothes, just jeans and a wrinkled cardigan. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face puffy. She looked small, not the confident, sharp-tongued woman who had snapped at me just a week ago. This was someone else, someone I remembered from years ago. "Hi," she whispered. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She hesitated, then walked in slowly, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. She didn't sit. She stood in the middle of my living room, staring at the floor. I read the whole letter," she said, 3 times. I nodded. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't think. I never meant to hurt you. The words came out rushed, messy, like they'd been dammed up behind pride and shame. I thought you were fine. You're always fine. You never ask for anything. I didn't even think. God, Mom, I didn't even think to check if you'd eaten. I still didn't say anything. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. She looked down again, tears slipping down her cheeks. Now I was selfish. I made you feel like you didn't matter, and you've always put me first, even when I didn't deserve it. There it was, the truth, soft, raw, late, but real. I walked into the kitchen and opened the oven. I'd made chicken soup earlier, not knowing why I felt compelled to cook more than I could eat. Now I did. I ladled a generous portion into a bowl, set it on a plate with a warm slice of buttered bread, and walked it to the table. Rachel sat down slowly. I placed the plate in front of her and said gently, "You eat first. I'll eat later." She froze, her hands hovering over the spoon. Then she looked up at me, really looked at me, and I saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, a full, aching understanding. It wasn't just food, it was a message. For years, I had served her plate first, taken the smaller portion, gone without so she could have more. And I had done it with love, without ever asking to be seen. Now I was showing her what it felt like, graciously, without anger. Her lower lip trembled. "Thank you," she whispered. I sat across from her, not picking up my own spoon, just letting her eat in peace, in silence. And in the space between us, something began to mend, not fully, not instantly, but like a cracked door easing open after being stuck for years. I didn't promise her things would go back to how they were, and she didn't ask. We both knew something had changed, and this time it needed to. We sat at the kitchen table as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long amber shadows across the floor, the kind of evening light that makes everything look softer, even hard conversations. Rachel had finished her soup and wiped her eyes more than once. She stared at her empty bowl like it held answers she hadn't found yet. For a while, we sat in a silence that wasn't tense, just thoughtful. Then she finally spoke. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," I replied, "but if you're ready to listen, I'll tell you what's changed." She looked up at me, eyes tired but open.
I love you, I began.
"That hasn't changed, and it won't. You'll always be my daughter."
She swallowed hard, nodding.
"But love, real love, isn't one-sided, and I've spent a long time giving while you've taken." Her eyes shimmered again, but she didn't interrupt. "I'm not angry," I continued. "I'm not doing any of this to hurt you. I just finally understand something I should have learned a long time ago. Love isn't about sacrificing myself to keep someone else comfortable." She lowered her gaze, ashamed. I folded my hands on the table, steadying my voice. "I used to think being a good mother meant shielding you from consequences, paying your way, saying yes even when I was tired, broke, or hurting.
But it's not," I said softly.
"It's not love if it costs me my self-worth." Rachel wiped her cheek with the sleeve of her cardigan. "I get it," she murmured. "Too late, but I get it." I leaned forward, not with accusation but with clarity. "The trust is still there. I didn't erase it, but going forward, it's not just yours because you exist. It's something you'll have to earn, not with perfection but with respect." She nodded slowly. "I don't want money right now. I just want to fix what I broke." That's when I reached across the table and placed my hand gently on hers. "This isn't about punishment, Rachel. It's about me finally choosing peace over being needed." She bit her lip, voice cracking. "I don't blame you. I wouldn't trust me either if I were you." I didn't answer that directly. I didn't need to. We finished dinner talking about simple things. Max's new favorite chew toy, a recipe I wanted to try next week. Nothing deep, just easy conversation, the kind that let you breathe again after too much tension. When it was time for her to go, I walked her to the door. She turned and hugged me tightly, but this time I didn't cling. I didn't fold myself into her arms like I was waiting to be held together again. I stood tall because I was together now. She pulled back and looked at me, the smallest smile trembling at the corner of her mouth. "I'll call you soon," she said. "I'd like that," I replied. She stepped outside, and I watched her walk to the car, shoulders a little heavier, but maybe, just maybe, heart a little lighter. When I closed the door, I didn't feel relief. I felt resolve. We'd had a beginning again, but this time it was on my terms. The seasons turned, and so did my life. It's been several quiet, steady months since that knock on my door, since Rachel stood in my kitchen with swollen eyes and an open heart. I never expected things to change overnight, and they didn't, but they did change. The visits began again, only this time they weren't wrapped in expectation. No requests for money, no thinly veiled errands disguised as bonding. Rachel would stop by with a container of soup she'd made or a plant for my garden. She'd stay and chat or sit with me in the backyard. While Max chased butterflies, there was a softness to her now, a humility I hadn't seen since she was young. She didn't try to impress me anymore. She just tried to show up. I noticed she started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, something she told me she'd always thought about but never made time for. "It's grounding," she said one day, eyes glassy. "It puts a lot into perspective." She still had her flaws, still talked too fast and interrupted sometimes, but the edge in her voice was gone. She even began insisting on picking me up for groceries every Sunday, saying it gave her a good excuse to slow down and see what actual food looks like. I laughed the first time she said that, not because it was funny, but because it was real. As for me, I didn't just rebuild my boundaries, I rebuilt myself. I finally planted the rose bushes I'd been dreaming of for years. Their blooms came in soft pink and deep crimson, like little victories swaying in the wind. I joined a local book club, small and warm, full of women my age with stories just as complex as mine. We talked more than we read, but those conversations fed me in ways no trust fund ever could. For the first time in my life, I planned something just for me, a solo trip up the coast, stopping at every small town and ocean cliff I'd only seen in magazines. I even booked a little B&B with a sea view and a breakfast basket brought to your door each morning. When Rachel heard, she looked surprised but not hurt. She smiled. "Good for you, Mom." That's when I knew we were healing, not by going backward, but by moving forward on new terms. I had finally stopped living for approval. I'd stopped giving until I was empty, and in return, I had gained something richer than money or applause. A life, my life, one that was full of color, purpose, and laughter. Not because I had control, but because I finally had clarity. I didn't need everyone to understand my choices. I just needed to respect them, myself, and now I did. There's a quiet that comes after pain, a stillness so deep it's almost holy. That's what I found in the days after Rachel left me hungry, not just for food but for love, for acknowledgement, for something I had stopped asking for a long time ago. Respect. She didn't know I had skipped meals to keep her dog calm and my pride intact. She didn't know I cried quietly into a pillow, too ashamed to admit that my own daughter had forgotten me. And she certainly didn't know I held the keys to her future all along. The trust was never the lesson, it was just the symbol. What mattered more, what changed everything, was realizing I had been starving for more than calories. I'd been starving for dignity, for connection, for the courage to say, "This is not enough." Sometimes we don't know how far we've strayed from ourselves until silence forces us to listen. And in that silence, I heard it clearly, a whisper from the part of me I had long buried beneath motherhood and duty. "You don't have to live like this anymore." So I stopped. I stopped shrinking to keep the peace, and the world didn't end. In fact, it started. I redefined what love meant, not as blind sacrifice, but as mutual care, as kindness with boundaries, as choosing truth even when it meant letting others feel discomfort. Rachel learned something too, that love is not guaranteed by blood or convenience. It's earned moment by moment in how we show up for one another. She'll still stumble, so will I, but now we move forward with eyes open and hearts honest. She left me hungry once, but I fed my soul, and in doing so, I nourished something far more lasting than any inheritance could offer. I found myself, and sometimes the best way to teach love isn't through giving more but by refusing to accept less. So now, when I sit in my garden, coffee in hand, the morning light falling on fresh blooms, I don't feel bitter. I feel full. Not because everything turned out perfectly, but because I did the bravest thing a mother, a woman, a soul can do. I chose myself, and that changed